Now, when I say that INFJs are activated by a repair fantasy, I do not mean by this that INFJs fantasize about power through repair or have sexual fantasies about repair or whatever that might mean. I'm not talking about INFJs as human beings fantasizing with an F in the way that we typically understand fantasies in our ordinary language. I use PH because PH, fantasy with PH, is first of all, it's a useful way to distinguish the two kinds of fantasying. One is fantasizing with F, the other is fantasying with PH. It directly is drawing on psychoanalysis, okay, particularly the work of Melanie Klein and Jacques Lacan. And it's to emphasize the fact that I think when it comes to the life of INFJs, of course, I draw on the insights of psychoanalysis very much, whether it be Jung, Freud, or other analysts, Melanie Klein being another big one, Lacan being another big one, Winnicott being another one. And this notion of fantasy PH is important to understand. It is essentially the structuring narrative that we unconsciously follow in order to bear existence. Existence means encountering difficulties. It means encountering trials. Life is difficult. And what psychoanalysis posits is that in order to bear with existence, the human subject has an unconscious fantasy that narrativizes the way they make sense of their life. Not at the conscious level, but at the unconscious level, okay? It's not just like, if we take the NI world, obviously, if we take the INFJ, of course this has to do with the NI world. But it's not just the NI world, because there is an active narration that is being subscribed to, okay? And this active narration structures experience in such a way as to ensure that there is meaning in what one does. So this has to do with the ego ideal, this has to do with the superego, this has to do with the ego, and it even has to do with the id, you know, the source of the impulses, drives, vital energy. In the case of INFJs, I think that the most common fundamental fantasy with PH is a fantasy of repair. And again, you understand now that I'm talking about a sort of mostly unconscious narrative that provides a certain structuring of INFJ experience, particularly as a way of both ensuring, safeguarding, and providing a dynamics of meaning that INFJs can't survive without, and neither can other types. But I think other types typically have other kinds of fantasies, structuring fantasies with PH. The fantasy of repair is, as its name indicates, a fantasy according to which the INFJ makes sense of their existence and structure their experience in such a way as to see themselves as engaged in a repairing story and as actuating a repairing story in their lives. It can be manifested in lives dedicated to humanitarian activities, working with NGOs, working as activists. So here we'd be talking about maybe repairing global injustices, okay, or repairing climate injustices. We can talk about repairing political injustices. In a sphere that is more one-to-one, we can talk about the fact that often INFJs are drawn to careers in psychology and psychotherapy as activating the fantasy of repair at the interpersonal level. Sometimes the INFJ is focused on their qualities as an empath who's able to relate to other people in such a way as to make sense of the of you know, their lives, and to provide some moral support to them. In this case, we could talk about you know, this whole notion of empathy is like an emotional fantasy of repair with a focus on the emotional. Even in the intellectual realm, often INFJs see themselves as having the kind of vision to see what's wrong with a particular theory by shifting frame, like I often talk about this gestalt switch. You know, we sort of change perspective, something that NI is uniquely suited to do. You can talk about, again, a narrative of repair of a particular intellectual vision, an intellectual contemplation. This all, I think, comes from early childhood, where INFJs experienced a damage in their ego from being misunderstood, from not feeling like they were accepted as they were, and often becoming quite fixated, usually not consciously, on how they can fix themselves. But in the notion of fixing themselves, there's the notion of repairing themselves. And I think that's how the unconscious fantasy of repair that ends up structuring much of INFJ life, and I certainly am an example of that, is born. But then, of course, depending on the kind of INFJ you are, your subtype, the kind of peculiar life trajectory, which is absolutely unique to you, your environment, your innate temperament, you will give a particularly distinct texture and coloring to the actuality or the actuating of this repair fantasy. So as hopefully you understand, this is by no means a critique, this is by no means an indictment or talking about something that ought to be changed. This kind of fantasy with PH is absolutely essential to human survival and meaning making, and I'm only merely trying to give a delineation of what I think it tends to look like in INFJ life. Let me know in the comments what you thought, guys. Don't forget that you can support me on Patreon. I need you more than ever. Could not do it without you. This channel would not exist without you and will no longer exist without your support. So please consider supporting me on Patreon. The link below. You know that you can access my Discord server, interact with me and the others there every day, as well as bonus video content every 2 or 3 weeks called the deep dives. Recently, I made one on the shadow functions. So again, for a small amount, you can really go a long way towards supporting my work. And of course, don't forget my 2 books on the INFJ, The Infinite Soul on INFJ's life in the world today, and the Ecstatic Soul, deepest investigation of the INFJ mind. Both available below. Get them if you haven't yet. All right, guys. See you soon. Bye-bye.